Screens for Jennifer, Chris? Is she on another screen or just not quite here yet?
Just not here yet.
Okay, all right. So good, all right. Good. Well, let's give her about a minute, and then if not, we'll go ahead and jump right in. Short, relatively short meeting, but a very important meeting with Barton here tonight. So there's Jennifer. Okay, now we're ready to go. Hey Jennifer, are you there? I see your name.
I am here. Sorry
Yay.
for the
No
Thank you.
problem. Okay, we are ready to go. So it's 7:33. Let's call our meeting to order, and I will read the adequate notice statement. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by the board in preparation of the 2022 annual meeting notice, which sets forth the date, time, and place of this meeting, and by properly posting such notice and forwarding the notice to those designated newspapers and persons requesting meeting notices. Moreover, in order to comply with the national and state declarations of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the Municipal Land Use Law, the Open Public Meetings Act, and the emergency remote meeting protocols for local public bodies, that's set forth in NJAC. This meeting is being held virtually on a web-based platform with remote public access. Okay. All right, so now we'll do to our Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is over my shoulder there, that shoulder, there we go. All right. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it
which
stands,
stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Yeah. We used to have to repeat that several times in Mrs. Clay's first grade class at Brayton School, because we had a couple guys like me that weren't quite so swift, and we had to get it right, you know? All right, so we've got a roll call tonight, Chris.
Sure. Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Zucker,
Present.
Councilmember O'Sullivan,
Here.
Ms. Boston Alvarez,
Here.
Mr. Brinkerhoff,
Here.
McNeil, Ms. McNeil.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Here.
Mr. Delory,
Here.
Mr. Perala,
Here.
Mr. Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli,
Here.
Mr. Stern,
Here.
and for the record, Ms. Wolf is here. She's our board attorney this evening, and you have a quorum, you can proceed.
Amanda, we're always happy to see you, so welcome.
Thank you.
And meeting minutes from January 24th. Does anyone have any comments or additions, deletions to the meeting minutes?
Bill, I have a comment, unless I missed it. I thought we approved the application subject to if the lots are not occupied by all the family members, that trees would be put in.
Yep.
I don't know if I missed that or it's there or not.
No, you didn't. I was going to make that exact comment on the resolution. Andy, you're right.
Yeah, it's not in the resolution either.
No, you're right. Thanks for bringing that up. That's correct. So I don't know whether we want to put that in both, but it sounds like to me, it certainly has to go in the resolution when we get to that. And let's just go back and take a look. Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. I think it needs to go in both. Absolutely. So Chris, if you can just add that to this, and then I think, Amanda, you were present at that meeting, as I recall.
Yes, my struggle with that is just that the conditions aren't supposed to be tied to the ownership of the property, because really you can't regulate ownership. So it was hard for me to put in there that it is tied to the ownership depending on who lives there. So that was my hesitancy in putting that in.
Well, but Amanda, they own both the lots. I think it was just that we were trying to say, okay, so the in-laws or whoever they are or occupying. So can we put it some way that if a non-family member, or if it's sold to a third party?
Yeah,
Because
if we
that would-
say sold to a third party, I think that works, but where we get into the which party is the third party, that's more of the problem. But if it's just to a third party, yeah, I think that works. And I think that they would understand the intent of that language because they were at the hearing and they should have recognized that.
Amanda, can we say something like if it's not of the same family or something, because then it's not ownership, or no?
I know, but you're not supposed to tie it to ownership. That was my only concern. I didn't want them to be like, oh, so if it's someone else and we don't have to plant the trees, just. But I think we say if it's sold to a third party, I think that will give them the message that they know that they have to do. And if they come back saying, what does that mean? We can certainly clarify it for them. But I'm just hesitant to put that language in the resolution.
Yeah, I mean,
I will add the, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I would argue with you, if they intend to sell it in 2 or 3 years anyway, there's no telling who can control or own the plot or do anything at that point.
Right,
Unless you make it maybe
right.
time contingent, which could be another way to go, but I think the ownership, the sale is probably the way to do it.
Yeah, I think if we tie it to a third party, they'll understand the intent. And if I get any pushback, we'll discuss it.
Okay,
But then do you want to carry the resolution just so I can confirm with council that it's fine? Was there council on this one? Let me just check.
and we're kind of, let's deal with the meeting minutes first, and then we'll
Okay.
jump into the resolution. So meeting minutes, just any more comments or questions or additions, deletion to the meeting minutes? If hearing none, Chris, we need a roll call vote.
We need a motion first to approve as amended.
Always helpful. Yeah. When someone make a motion to approve the
So
minutes,
moved.
and a second.
Second.
All right, thanks, Rich. Okay, all right, Chris.
Now we need the voice vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Okay, great.
Seeing none.
All right, so now we can go to the resolution. And so we would like to make that addition, as Andy brought up, and as you've discussed, Amanda. Anything else that comes to people's mind with regard to the resolution? That was the only thing that jumped out at me with regard to the resolution. Everything else seemed very good.
Okay, then we can just make that change and I'll just let council know.
Yeah, and I think we can.
He agreed to it at the hearing.
I feel like we can, approve the resolution subject to that change. Is that what you're suggesting? Amanda,
Yep,
we do
that works.
I think we should do that.
Yep,
Unless
that's
there-
amended.
Any objections to that? Okay, and may I have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
And a second. All right, Paul, great. Thanks, Jay and Paul. All right. Okay, so thanks, Amanda. You'll pass that on to council. And I suppose if there's any issues, you'll bring it back to us.
Will do.
Okay, great. All right, so now we're moving along.
We
need to vote on that?
We need a roll call for that.
Again, why do we keep
Yep.
doing this? No, I'm sorry. Let's go ahead.
Don't worry, it'll be quick.
I'm just having so much fun. I can't wait to get to Barton's presentation here. All
All
right,
right. Chairman Anderson,
yes.
Vice Chairman Zucker,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Brinkerhoff,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
Yes.
Mr. Delory,
Yes.
Mr. Perrella,
Yes.
Mr. Fiore,
Yes.
and Mr. Formicelli.
Yes.
All right.
All right, there we go. Good. All right, so here we are with the leadoff presentation tonight. Just sort of for the record, we all know this, but just wanted to read this into the record that, as you all recall, when we completed the master plan re-exam several years ago, we identified 2 tasks that the board wanted to tackle. One was the update of the development regulations, the DRO, and then secondly, to review and update the historic preservation ordinance. So as you all recall, we formed a subcommittee of 3 members, one of which is Councilwoman is not on, being replaced by Danny, but Councilmember Little was on that team, but it was Andy and Jennifer and Councilmember Little. So we formed that task force. They took a look at the existing ordinance, reviewed it, spent some time with Steve Warner, spent some time with Historic Preservation Commission members, and have put together a draft that they have passed on to Barton. So what we'd like to do tonight is to have Barton kind of go through and talk about historic preservation ordinances and how historic preservation is handled kind of on a statewide basis to give us an idea of sort of what the field looks like out there. That's the purpose tonight for his presentation. He is a consultant. He's being retained by the board for whenever we need his assistance. And also he'll be available to council as well. The overall approach that we've been doing, it's a little bit different than as it's laid out in the MLUL. The MLUL basically says that this should come from the Historic Preservation Commission to the council, and from the council to the planning board, and the planning board essentially says it is consistent with the master plan. So we've, as the planning board, decided we would pick it up and work with historic preservation and sort of take the ball down the field on our own. This is why we brought Barton on board. After we hear Barton's presentation tonight, everybody will get a copy of the work that Jennifer and Andy and Beth had done to review. And we're all going to kind of chew on that for a month or however long it takes, and then get back together probably and have a conversation with Barton about it and sort of talk about it as a board. From then, we'll have to sort of coordinate with council, a little bit of coordination with staff as well. And at that point, it'll at some form will go off to council for their review. Public hearings will be held maybe by this board and or by the council, not sure yet. Then ultimately, it will, as we said earlier, it will come from council back to the planning board for our consistency and our judgment that's consistent with the master plan. So that's generally the process. It's not something we have to do tomorrow. It's something that'll take some time over the next month or two or three or four to kind of work it through the process. So Jennifer or Andy, anything you'd like to add to the description that I laid out here?
All right. Well, send me a picture.
You did a good job, Bill.
All right, I tried to.
I would like to add that Barton Ross is the consultant in New Jersey for historic districts and historic district ordinances. So he's the right guy, and I'm glad he's here.
Yep. Well, thanks. And that's true. Barton also, as we all may be aware, was involved in the initial ordinance, or the ordinance that we're currently working on some 10 plus years ago, I guess is when he did that. Yeah. So without, as they say, without further ado, let's introduce Barton. Barton is principal at Barton Ross and Partners, which is a full service award-winning architecture, planning, and historic resource consulting firm. We really look forward to the presentation tonight, Barton. And then after we're done, hopefully you'll stick around for a few questions, because I'm sure we'll have some at that point. And then Barton and Chris are going to somehow work together so that we'll get to see Barton's presentation here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If I could just ask that everyone mute their microphones, because I think somebody has some background noise. Thanks. So.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. No pressure. But yeah, I'm glad to be here, since I did serve with some Historic Preservation Commission 10, 12 going on years ago. So it's nice to be back. And I've helped a lot of municipalities around New Jersey basically implement preservation and kind of carry out the mission of their commissions and how things get reviewed. So if you guys can bear with me, I'm going to try to share screen here. Okay. Okay, can everyone see?
Yes.
Good. All right. All right. So bear with me. This will be like 15, 20 minutes, but I think it's a good like primer that everyone's on the same page, talking about how historic preservation really works in New Jersey and how you can successfully implement a historic preservation ordinance in the state. So yeah, this is just some background on me. I'm an architect and a planner. I work really all over the mid-Atlantic and even in Florida, but I've worked a lot in New Jersey with other municipalities like Neptune, Montclair, Verona, Melbourne, Scotch Plains, Plainfield, North Plainfield, Saddle River, Cape May, Westfield. So lots of different places. And I've also served on Preservation New Jersey Board for many years and served as their president. So, I know a lot of people around the state, some really good people who do this for a living. These are some ordinances I've written around the state. I've probably written at least a dozen at this point. Milburn, North Plainfield, Neptune, which has Ocean Grove, and some others. So, we have a pretty good system for understanding what the Historic Preservation Office in Trenton is really looking for. And this is an article I wrote for the League of Municipalities magazine a few years back, explaining how historic preservation is really a catalyst that gives physical places their cultural identity and helps promote a sense of local pride and stewardship for future generations. And this was really nice since it was in the League magazine. I got to talk with a lot of town managers and other officials around the state. And so why is there historic preservation regulation in the United States? It all kind of goes back to Penn Station in New York City. So this was this beautiful building, the train station where you would have come up into New York City. It was designed by McKim, Mead and White, and it was demolished in 1963 after only being there for, as you can see, 53 years. And today this is Madison Square Garden. So you used to come up into the city in this beautiful building based off of Roman baths, and today you come up through Madison Square Garden. So it's a lot different. And when this was demolished, people were just so outraged that it kind of became the impetus for historic preservation movement in the United States. The Landmark Preservation Commission in New York City was founded 2 years after this, and that paved the way for the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, which did this. It created the 59 state and tribal historic preservation offices. It started the National Register of Historic Places. It created the Certified Local Government Program, which we'll talk more about. The Section 106 review process, that's where federal agencies must take into consideration any actions that could adversely affect historic properties listed or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So anytime federal money is used, so even FCC, DOT, road construction, railroad stuff, anything that uses federal money gets a review if it's in proximity to historic preservation resources. The Advisory Council on Preservation in DC, and Section 110, which is federal agency stewardship, and you can think of that as like the GSA, how they have to consider preservation in their thinking. And then in 1978, the Penn Central case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it is the controlling U.S. Supreme Court case really around takings, and it's the only preservation law case that was ever decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, and probably will be the only one ever decided by the Supreme Court. And it recognized historic preservation as a legitimate government objective, and this really paved the way for all future public regulation of historic properties in the United States. So that's Grand Central Station down there, and Marcel Brewer designed this huge building for Penn Central above the station. And again, people were outraged. And what ended up happening is it wasn't a taking because they were able to sell their air rights above the building. So in New Jersey, the HPO in Trenton, they maintain the state national registers. They do all the regulatory reviews. We just talked about Section 106, 110, the New Jersey Transit. The CLG program that we'll talk about, which could be local money for Summit, State Historic Preservation Plan, and general technical assistance to New Jersey residents. So in New Jersey, if you go back to 1947 Constitution, it found that a local ordinance must promote a valid public purpose, not be so restrictive as to deprive a property owner of all reasonable economic use of their property, honor the owner's constitutional right to due process. And eventually that led, as most of you know, to the Municipal Land Use Law, 1975, which is New Jersey's enabling legislation. This first permitted a historic preservation plan element as part of the planning board's master plan for municipalities. And for the first time, historic preservation commissions kind of came to be in New Jersey. And, this really promoted the conservation of historic sites and districts, open space, energy resources, and valuable natural resources, which is still true today. So municipalities were allowed to designate and regulate their historic sites and districts. And these are some definitions of what historic site and districts meant at the time. So then you get into your documents for historic preservation success in New Jersey. So you have to survey first to know what you have in a town or municipality. Then you can do your historic preservation element of the master plan, where you're explaining what you want to do and you're planning for it. And then you can adopt a municipal ordinance, as Bill was saying, if that's identified in your historic preservation element as part of the master plan. And then eventually you can have design guidelines that kind of guide applicants and homeowners and residents what they can and can't do. So, what's eligible? Just because something's old, it doesn't mean it's historic. And these are the 3 requirements to qualify for the National Register of Historic Places, also known as 477. So there's 4 criteria for significance evaluation that you see right here. Then you have 7 consideration for age, type of building. And most important, you have 7 aspects of integrity, which are location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And I encourage everyone to read something called National Register Bulletin 15. There's a PDF online to understand what it means for a building to be considered historic. So what do you put in these architectural surveys? So there's actually DEP forms like this one I did over in Plainfield. And municipalities are really supposed to do these every 6 to 10 years, but it's sometimes many decades before you really get around to revising it. The new way the state wants you to do it obviously uses GIS. So this is all GIS based. So nowadays when we're entering it, it's not just a sheet that we have to scan later. It's actually all in their system, and they should be able to access it very easily in Trenton. So when are these surveys required? So this really helps when you have a local historic commission or even planning board, and you want to understand, well, what is this property that's coming in front of me? And that helps determine applications for CAs, but also site plan applications and alterations over time, character defining features, when was it built, what's its setting, what kind of materials is it made of? And this is actually an example from the 1980s in Summit. So in the 70s and 80s, pretty much every single municipality in New Jersey got these forms done, and they literally went around to every property in the state and did these 2-page DEP forms. And actually I scanned all of Summit's, so I have it all OCR'd here on my computer, and it's like 5,000 some pages. So I mean it's a wealth of information and a really good resource when you're trying to review properties for their historic integrity and why the property is even important. So then we get to historic preservation elements of the master plan. And these typically identify local historic resources and the standards used to assess their significance, promote historic preservation as a tool for economic development and community revitalization, and set forth goals and strategies for municipal historic preservation policy. So municipalities can curb suburban sprawl, preserve open space, earn sustainable Jersey points, and reduce their landfill waste by utilizing existing building stock. So this is not a required element, but most communities, especially ones with historic resources, do this plan element as part of their master plan. And on the upper right is Cape May Point, which only has about 300 residents, and they have a 20 or 25 page historic preservation element of their master plan. So municipalities that have undertaken this planning process consistently have greater community awareness, increased pride of place, lower crime rates, enhanced neighborhood identity, and broader investment dollars in heritage tourism. And these are a couple examples of ones I've done. The city of Plainfield on a municipal level, and also we recently did one for all of Somerset County. So what's in a historic preservation ordinance? So the HPO actually provides this 8-page brochure. It's on their website. It's kind of a legal Cliffs Notes or cheat sheet for HP ordinance statutes per the municipal land use standards. So I'd recommend everyone take the time and download and read this, because you can see here it gives you all the the actual statute numbers and everything that you're supposed to use when you set up a historic preservation ordinance in your town. So historic preservation commissions in New Jersey actually really date from the 1985 amendments to the Municipal Land Use Law. So 10 years later, basically they said, no, we're redoing it. So all modern historic preservation commissions in New Jersey date from after 1985. So the governing body establishes the ordinance that the Preservation Commission follows. The planning board can act as HPC in small towns. In small towns, we mean like 2,500 people or less. There's 5, 7, or 9 regular members. They serve 4-year terms. They're appointed by the mayor or planning board chair, but typically it's the mayor, up to 2 alternate members. And they select a chair, vice chair, and a secretary, just like any other land use board. So this is what commissions do in New Jersey. This is like their plan right here. They survey historic sites. They make recommendations to the planning board on inclusion of master plan elements. They advise the planning board and zoning board on development applications involving historic sites or districts listed in the historic preservation element of the master plan. They provide written reports to the administrative officer or the planning board regarding permit applications. And they perform advisory, educational, informational functions that promote historic preservation. So local preservation ordinance are the only way to regulate privately owned historic properties in the United States of America. So they're not regulated by state or national, they're really regulated by local ordinances. And this is what goes into it. You have your purpose definitions, the authority of the HPC, their criteria and procedures for designation, what actions they're allowed to review, basically, do they report directly to the planning board or the administrative officer, their appeal process through the court system, enforcement provisions, all the violations and things, and then demolition controls, which always come into play. And then reporting depends really how it's drafted. So in New Jersey, we have this very archaic thing of strong commission and weak commission. So strong commission just means the HPC reports directly to the administrative officer for the permit. So their word, whatever they say, that goes through their resolution. Weak commission is basically what Summit has always had, which reports directly to the planning board, who then can make their own decision and convey that to the administrative officer. So they can accept, modify, or reject HPC's report and advice. In all honesty, this is how it works when there's a site plan application or anything anyway. So, all right, and then you have in New Jersey certificate of appropriateness. This is what it's called, what the resolution for a permit is called from the Historic Preservation Commission. And so in the application review process, owners of locally designated sites and districts, they got to get approval from their Preservation Commission for any exterior alterations, additions, new construction, demolition. The commission approval is typically in this form, and it's an example from Ocean City. To be approved, the application must meet the design review criteria or design guidelines that the municipality has adopted. Now, when you do all these things right, you can become a certified local government, and there's only 46 of them out of the 565 municipalities in New Jersey. These 46 are eligible for up to $25,000 in funding from the state every year. So they just keep getting the money over and over again. And this doesn't even mean you designate properties and everything. Just having the right ordinance and the right system is in place, as I'm explaining here. Like Metuchen, I work for Metuchen as well. They're trying to get the same thing going, just to be eligible for this funding and to basically show that you're serious about preservation in your community. So then you establish design guidelines to basically point applicants and people in the right direction for what they have to do. They should reference the Secretary of Interior standards and other common sense principles that emphasize preservation of historic character, repair over replacement, compatibility of alterations. Specific examples from municipality are always important to applicants to understand. And on the left is actually summits that we utilized years ago when I served with the commission. And it's actually, it functions pretty well. So the philosophical principles in the Secretary of the Interior standards, which is a national platform, have been proven to be important in the successful administration of local historic districts. Typically, they're either directly cited within the preservation ordinance, or they're used as the basis for development of a local design guideline. And in New Jersey, we have the award-winning rehabilitation subcode from 1998, which guides alterations of existing structures and identifies building elements that may meet relaxed code requirements in order to preserve the value and material integrity of a historic building. And this can help property owners waive requirements for means of egress, elevators, fire suppression systems. And when this works, owners are very happy if they can get around some of these things. For instance, the example here is, on an old Victorian house, you only have a 28-inch high, balustrade on your porch. So you don't have to bring that up to code if it's a historic structure. So you can get around certain requirements. And in the other towns, this is actually a big thing. So as probably a lot of you know, DCA, effective March 5th, 2018, changed how they administer permits for minor work and ordinary maintenance. And this has really made a dent in historic districts where, you now don't need a building permit for siding repair, windows, doors, roofing, decks, gutters. However, all of those things would need a certificate of appropriateness or a historic approval. So actually the building departments, when they don't have tabs on all the contractors anymore and what they're doing, they're actually very elated when they have historic districts or historic properties, because then they have a reason to go out there and try to review things with the owners of the property and get them to come in and get approval. And so we end up working a lot with the building department over the past couple of years as this has kind of evolved. And then when everything's working right, these are some examples. This is in Montclair, Bloomfield Avenue. And this is a historic building in a downtown where they had a lot of problems with the terracotta, because every time these tenants would come and go, they would basically, drill these signs right into the terracotta. So the building was literally like falling apart. And working with the HPC, we came up with this ingenious system of restoring all the terracotta masonry. We put these sign brackets, as you see in the upper right, onto the enlarged storefront. So now they get more glass, and now they have these basically sign brackets that are drilled into the mullions of the storefronts. So now every time a tenant comes and goes, they put their sign on the signboard and they do not have to drill into the building. And this was a site plan application in front of the planning board. However, they appreciate having the HPC's input. And it works the same in residential districts. This is a house in Short Hills, which in the upper left in 1996, that's what it looked like. And 20 years later, this is what it looks like. So many alterations over the years. They had to get HPC approvals. And I can tell you in the upper left, according to the tax records, the house was worth about $360,000 in 1996. And by 2016, so 20 years later, it's worth over $3 million. So having the historic district can really help for that too, because your neighbors in historic districts know that they can't make any, inappropriate alterations to their building. And so it kind of brings everyone's standards in the neighborhood up. And this is another example of a very nondescript building, but they had to go through design review. And this is the Lululemon, and we were able to get them to do some nice, art and streetscape improvements. So this was a very successful project as well. And design review boards are illegal in New Jersey. So just having a historic preservation commission can sometimes help the other land use boards. And like I said, that applies on site plan applications as well, where HPC members often can take some of these materiality review and research under their wing and kind of help their planning board members. And then in Summit, so Summit actually, the commission was started in 1986. So that's right after the 1985 MLUL revisions. And it's been going since then. It's, created by a new ordinance in 1995, and now we're looking at another ordinance. And that's pretty similar in most other towns. They go through multiple ordinance iterations over the years, just trying to bring the commissions into, proper legal framework with the rest of the municipality. And in 2010, Summit Downtown was put on the state and national register of historic places. And so when I was on the commission, this is one of my tasks. I helped locate and do these signs with the commission. We went to CWA Studios, and this is what it looked like before it got installed. So Summit is definitely worthy of historic preservation, many, many resources. I can't tell you how many people, tell me like, why can't our downtown just look like Summit? So, everyone in everyone in the city should be very proud of the downtown, because it's definitely one that other towns try to emulate. And so in closing, historic preservation, it's really a tool that's been used to substantially contribute to the continued quality of life and economic vitality in New Jersey. And in every instance, local historic designation increases property values, especially in downtown commercial districts. And you can see these attached brochures here. There's many, brochures and writings about this out on the internet that you could look up that really attest to this fact, because practically every successful town or city in the United States has local historic preservation ordinances and jurisdictions over properties. So with that, I will stop for questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Well, Bart, that
Thank
was
you.
terrific. Thanks very much. I don't know, is the presentation you made, is that proprietary? Is that something that we could circulate to the board members? There's a lot of things in there that I'd like to study up on a little bit. But I don't know if that's something that you're comfortable in doing or not.
Yeah, sure. I'll send a PDF and you can distribute to everyone.
Okay, I'll send that to Chris. Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, any questions for Barton? It was really a good presentation. Covered a lot of territory. Jay, was that you?
Yeah, just unmuting, just thinking for a moment. That was great, Barton. Thank you. Just overwhelming though for some of us who are not as facile with HP as you are. I have to do some homework, in particular, reviewing your presentation. Thank you very much. It's very good.
Well, I remember as a young child, my mother being very upset. Native New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn, very upset about the loss of Penn Station. Apoplectic about the loss of Penn Station. I said, Mom, what's the big deal? Just wait till you see what they're going to put in its place. It's so terrible. Anyway, so that was my first introduction to this, going way back when. And then Jackie Kennedy got involved, as we all know, and made it a cause celeb and took off from there. So that was a loss, one that's not far from our home.
Martin, I have a question. Yeah. It's more of a broad question, but oftentimes people are hesitant to apply or purchase homes that have historic designation because they feel they're so restricted in what they can do with the property. Can you address that? I don't know if that's accurate, if it's not, but I know it's oftentimes, a perception.
Yes, it definitely is a perception. I spend a lot of time actually talking to realtors and potential buyers, trying to assuage them that it'll be okay. Obviously, every municipality is a little bit different how they handle it, but we always try to be, everywhere I work, understanding that people may want to do additions, they may want to make some changes, and it's really just to kind of push them in the right direction. That look, if you want to do an addition, you can do it off the side or off the back of the house. That's not going to be a problem, and you just got to use the right materials and get some design review. And even where it's like larger commercial projects and stuff that eventually need site plan review and everything, I think everyone, including developers, at first they always pitch fits about it, but when they go through the whole process, it may take a couple extra months, but they're always happy at the end because we thought through every design aspect and every material, and usually they actually think the project turned out better than it would have. So I think having extra sets of eyes and review on things is good. And I don't think I've ever been in all my years practicing where basically they're like, no, you can't do an addition, or no, you can't do something. It's just a matter of just going through the motions, and maybe you have to go back to the drawing board a couple of times, but then usually the project's better anyway.
Rich, just to follow up on what Barton said, and obviously we used the draft in the subcommittee, but we spent a lot of time trying to not make this resolution or draft or whatever we're calling it restrictive, right? So yes, you live in an historic house. We don't want you putting vinyl windows in. But if you need to replace the front of your house because you have termites or whatever, there are modern materials that look like historic materials that you can use. If you want to put a family room in the back of the property, sure. As long as the front, the sides don't look like you've changed your historic house. So we spend a lot of time trying to get over people's objections or people feeling as if, well, the Constitution says I can do whatever I want with my property, which is not true. But at the same time, we want to keep the historic preservation of Summit. We have a lot of beautiful houses. We have a very historic town. We have historic buildings in the downtown. At the same time, we tried to make it so that people could buy an historic house and improve it, put in new windows, but keep the look of the historic house, but have energy efficient windows versus having to say, well, I bought this house from 1836 and I must have a single pane window and my heating bill is going to be $5,000 a month. That's not what we tried to do.
Can I follow up on that? Because I have a two-part question, Barton. First, and specifically to Andy's point, what are the mechanics of that? Andy, I agree with what you said. And I know that's what you and Jennifer and others were looking to accomplish, and I hope we can. What are the mechanics of doing that? What's a certificate of appropriateness? Where does that come from? Who grants that? What are the conditions of getting that? What is the process for getting it? Is it mandatory? Who determines that? Who do I go to if I'm that buyer in Andy's example? How do I get that? And what are literally the mechanics of accomplishing it? Because I think that is what concerns people, and perhaps me, but I just don't know. So if you help me understand it, perhaps I'll.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt Barton, and I'm going to let him answer, and unfortunately nobody has the draft because Barton has a couple of comments. So Bill will distribute everybody the draft and then everybody can read it. There are the draft of the proposal explains that process.
Oh, okay.
And Barton, obviously you can answer, but it's all in there. It's not just, hey, you own an historic house, go down to City Hall, walk around the 5th floor and try and find it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what will scare, frankly, people off, including me. Barton?
Yeah, the certificate of appropriateness, it's really just the resolution from the commission, and commissions where they have an attorney, the attorney drafts it just like your board or a zoning board or anything. So, and it's called certificate of appropriateness because in some places they actually, they do like minor reviews and other type of, expedited type of reviews just to help people. That's kind of the idea, because some people are like, hey, I need to order my window. I can't wait a whole nother month. And so a lot of commissions have actually gone that route to be as, business and homeowner friendly as they can.
There's more to it than that, Barton. Come on. Come on. If the answer is what Andy suggests, I'll read it. I'm fine doing that. But clearly I know there's more. That doesn't really satisfy me.
Well,
but Jay, the other side of the coin is there are historic districts. So when you're buying a property, you will be knowing that you're buying a property or you're living in an historic district. So assuming that, you're buying a property, you're being represented by counsel, every real estate contract in the state of New Jersey has a 3-day counsel review. Hopefully you have that attorney reviewing it, and your attorney comes to you and said, hey, you're buying an historic house. Along with that historic house, you need to follow so-and-so guidelines. So there's nothing hidden to it. It's all out. It's all state. It's under the MLUL. You're not going to go buy a house on, I'm just going to pick a street, Hobart, and then find out the next day you can't put vinyl siding on an 1863 house.
Well, no, my question has to the vinyl siding part of it, not to the buying the house. It's what can I and can't I do?
Well, there's design, there's to the slides that Barton put up earlier. Okay. The design regulations are very similar to what we worked on for 2 years. There are guidelines as to what is like material, meaning you don't change wood to vinyl. You don't necessarily have to find the piece of wood that came off the oak tree from the redwood forest, because A, you can't get it, B, it doesn't exist. But there's a material in the modern world that looks like that you need to buy.
Well, that in my mind, the devil's in the details, and that's that component of it. Clearly, at the macro level, historic preservation is a good thing. There could be no debate about that. I personally would like to understand better how it works, and we're granting potentially what I would call enormous power to an unelected appointed group of historic preservationists, and that's fine, depending on what that power entails and what authority and discretion they may or may not have. I just need to understand it.
Yeah, and I think you'll see in the draft that those mechanics and the process. And by the way, there is in the draft an out where there is in sort of, I don't know exactly how to define it, but somebody can basically object. They can put their house on the market. So this is not like a draconian thing. But again, I think if to Bill's point, he said it multiple times, people in this city would like our city to have, and to what Barton said, we have a gorgeous downtown. Very few other cities in the state of New Jersey have similar downtowns. And I don't think we necessarily want all of the nice brick buildings being ripped down and having glass facades. They may be pretty buildings, but we don't want 1,000 of them in Summit. And I don't think we want all the houses to change. So there's a balance between, maintaining the feel of Summit, but at the same time, I don't agree that yes, well, for lack of a better word, the planning board, the historic preservation zone, well, of course, we're all unelected officials. This is going to be approved by council after all the public has a say in it. So it's not any different than anything given the Broad Street West thing. Public, conversation, public things, and the elected officials are the ones that vote this in.
That's
Jennifer has her hand up
we have
too.
a 450. One more time. We have a 450-page GRO. Believe me, Bill and Beth and Krista and I spent countless months going.
One last point.
So I'm there.
This is 34 pages. I think our thing is 30-something pages for a town of 22,000 people. And I think Barton made a comment that a town of, I forgot, 2,000 has a 25-page ordinance. For a town of 22,000 people that is an historic town, we could have one that's a lot bigger.
I'll let it go.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
You're on mute, Matt.
Sorry, yeah. Jennifer very politely used her hand raising electronic digital hand.
Does that mean I get to go?
Yeah.
I think that the devil is in the details, but similarly to our zoning board of adjustment and the planning board, they're set up the same way as the HPC, which we are all designated by our mayor. We're not, and none of us are elected, and we're making big decisions on big projects at the planning board level. So the only difference here is that, to Jay's question, you do an application, you're in historic district, and most of the time we envision, and it's just logical that somebody's renovating their house and they're going to put an addition on the back. And so they will put a package of materials into the city to get permits, et cetera. And part of that, a copy of that would go to the HBC with just a page form saying, this is what I'm going to do to the front and the sides of my house. And then we'd review it and give them a certificate of appropriateness, or give them a certificate of appropriateness with tweaks, which is basically the way it's probably going to happen most of the time. Either we love your design, here's your certificate of appropriateness, or we suggest you tweak this, this, and this, and here's your certificate of appropriateness, which is a conditional certificate of appropriateness. You know, Barton and I haven't discussed what Andy and the rest of the subcommittee had come up with, and we will, but we were softening the template that we started with. And also we limited the review to the parts of the building that are visible from the public right of way. So that will eliminate all the additions on the back. And most, as we all know, most renovations are kitchens, baths, and additions off the back. And maybe you're painting and scraping the outside of the house, you know, but that's the vast majority. We're not reviewing anything on the inside. So that's all the kitchens and baths are out. And now we're not really looking at rear additions if they're not visible from the public right of way.
I had Matthew.
So it's limiting.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
So anyway, it's an application. And I think most of the time it's going to be in conjunction with an application they're going to have to make anyway to get their building permits. But you know, I don't think it's as extraordinary and as far afield than we might think. And it's pretty common across the United States now. And it's just a matter of educating the public as to you're in a historic district or you have an individually listed building. And so if you're going to do something to the front facade or the sides that's visible from the public right of way, you might have to get a certificate of appropriateness. Basic general maintenance is not included. You don't have to get a certificate of appropriateness for that. It's for something that changes the character of the building.
Hey, Matthew, you were up there, Rich, followed by Rich.
But I was thinking maybe Barton should answer this original question by Jay, because we've all interceded, and I think Barton maybe should loop back and see what he has to say on how does this really work.
All right, Bart, sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jennifer just answered a lot of the things, the issues there. You know, a lot of things are maintenance and people don't realize it. And actually a lot of the design guidelines explain a lot of the materiality and stuff. And a lot of the commissions actually allow hardy board or, other type of little more modern materials. If it's wood clad windows, sometimes they're fine with that. There's also a difference between like contributing buildings that are very important versus non-contributing buildings in like a downtown. And so the commissioners are supposed to take that into consideration when they review an application. And actually, I mean, here's an example. We just designated a property in a town, and it was an 18th century house, and it's been there a long time. And they basically objected because they're like, now I'm going to be, coming and having to come in front of you guys all the time. And we went through what changes they would have made in the last 15 or 20 years that might have required them to come to the commission, and there was zero. So they would have never had to come to the commission. Like, I think they like repainted their fence, they, fixed their windows, they had some broken panes, all that maintenance stuff doesn't have to come. They replaced some of their wood shingles on their roof. So all that type of maintenance stuff, is just exempted. And also, any type of paint color, we don't want to be the paint police. So there's pretty much no commission in New Jersey, including the Summit draft ordinance that would regulate paint colors or colors of houses, because that can obviously always change later over time anyway. So I think actually, you end up being exempted a lot more than people think from having to come to a commission.
Hey, Matt, go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't believe the historic districts in Summit are codified, meaning they are named, but they aren't actually part of the legal mechanism for districting. Is that a requirement for this process?
Barton?
You asking me?
Yes,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
Anything you locally designate, it's by ordinance and everything. So, first you have to have the ordinance, then you can locally designate properties. But all properties, even if it's in a district, they're all designated by block and lot. And there's a whole procedure which is laid out in the ordinance, how you have to notify people and, allow them, time to do appeal letters or allow them at least public access to talk about it. So there's a whole process that's laid out, and it's actually very legally regimented so that, a district can actually be codified in that way. Yeah, you can't just say like, hey, I'm going to draw a line on a map and now that's the district. It's all by actual block and lot.
So in a sense,
But also,
council.
Matthew, I want you to know that all the districts and all the individual listed buildings have been included in our master plan for decades. So I do think there's some legitimacy to our local districts and our local landmarks beyond completely non-existent, because they have been in every master plan since '86.
Oh, for sure. And the Summit's done a great job of that list keeping and things. I just wondered if there was a required mechanism in order to have the ordinance that you would then have to go
The notification period is, and that's in the ordinance, that we were very careful to make sure that people were notified and not just make them assume or think just because, even though to Jennifer's point, it's been there since '86, we specifically said you will be notified that you are in a historic district, so that it's not we didn't want this to be a surprise to anybody. We didn't want this to be, hey, we're the town of Summit and we're telling you you're in this house and you can't do it. So there were a lot of things put in to make sure people understand they are buying a house or own a house that is in an historic district.
And Steve Warner was involved with, I know with the subcommittee looking at the draft that we're all going to get a chance to look at here shortly. So that was important. And Rich, you were.
And then, I'm sorry, I just have two more questions. My
Go ahead,
apologies,
Matthew.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
Yes, the second question was regarding non-UCC permitting. I know you had mentioned, Barton, that there are things that people do to their house. Can you give 2 or 3 examples of what that would include, where the commission would opine on or participate in the construction office's application?
Sure. So the big ones in other towns are, a house has a slate roof and they don't need a permit, and now suddenly there's an asphalt shingle roof. And so that's one example. Another example is they have wood windows and they take them off and put in vinyl windows, or they have wood clapboard siding and they take that off and, try to, make it more green by doing insulation board and then vinyl siding, and all those things, get caught, unfortunately, by like code enforcement, because, you're not out there like watching every house every day. But that's where I said where the building department is sometimes actually appreciative, because that's their mechanism to actually go out there and inspect properties where, in a lot of instances now the DCA has stripped some of that power away from them.
So in a sense, then it's code enforcement that might identify where a house didn't get a construction permit because, let's say, siding or new roof wasn't required, but because by ordinance they existed in a district where they went ahead and did something like that, they are therefore in violation of that code.
Yeah, so that's on my one slide where what HPCs do. That's the final bullet point, which is the educational advisory, get out there, outreach in the community. A lot of towns handle this by once a year, they send out a historic homeowner letter or postcard so that people in these houses know that they're in a historic house. And if they don't want penalties and violations, they, if they're contemplating any change, they should check in with the municipality first, because sometimes their contractors don't, right? Their contractors like, hey, I just put a roof on down the street and it wasn't historic and I didn't need a permit. What did I do here? So that does unfortunately sometimes fall on property owners, but that's the education outreach component. And we also always try to have like a seminar with realtors every year or two, because realtors are like the gatekeepers. And as long as they're clued in, if they're selling a historic house or not, that usually helps.
Okay. And then do you know the $25,000, what do groups spend that on typically? And
so it's not bricks and mortar. So any type of planning project. So you can do a historic preservation element of the master plan update. You could do those architectural surveys. You could even write an ordinance. You could do a National Register nomination for some other property. So design guidelines, anything that's a planning soft cost type of project falls under that.
thank you. As a positive story, our local opera house was being restored, and they were depending upon the siding company to pick and choose. And our historic preservation stepped in and did a fantastic job of restoring the Opera House. So it was a real saving grace that there were the group of people that were able to take the building from what it was going to be to what it is today. So there was a lot of value. Thanks for answering my questions.
Sorry. Rich?
No, I think you guys answered what I was going to ask. I mean, again, I think I agree with Jay. I mean, I think the more this can be delineated and the more buyers and owners are aware of the specifics, because I think the anxiety comes in where they're feeling they have to go before a board and they don't know what the response is going to be, right? So the more you know going in, I would imagine that's going to eliminate, that angst.
As you all recall, the design guidelines were added to our DRO that were based on the historic preservation design guidelines, but just added to. So it shouldn't be a big surprise because they've now been in the DRO for a couple years. And that was just citywide, but very helpful for historic districts. That's some of the expectations are already in our design guidelines. So at least we're a little ahead of the game as far as getting those started. I think they're a very good start, and Barton was very involved originally in getting them drafted.
I think if this does end up moving forward, I think, not just the annual postcard, but I think some type of city brochure for those buyers and owners that can be provided in coordination with the real estate agencies, because otherwise folks are going to be caught off guard with this stuff. And if those pamphlets can really be specific, so people understand what they're getting into and what they have and what their responsibilities are. But they're going to rely a lot on their agents to, introduce this to them and explain this to them. So I think that's a critical component.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I said before, and also their agents, their attorneys, and if it's going to be adopted, then the city needs to be proactive. And again, we did not want anybody to be blindsided that they either lived in an historic area or they were buying a house in an historic area. And again, listen, and also, there is some responsibility that if you choose to buy a house that is an historic house, well, then you should be owning up to the responsibilities of that. And, to Barton's point in the presentation, a lot of these houses are selling for a lot more money. The one example he put up, it's a gorgeous house. It's not as if we're not allowing you to have a nice house. In fact, you're taking a gorgeous historic house. You're able to add to the back to it, put on a family room. It's the right of way. It's the view from the right of way, so that the look, the feel, and the historic look of Summit remains. It's not as if you can't go put the big family room on the back that nobody can see.
So Andy, if I'm a buyer coming into Summit, this is what my mind goes to. That's not necessarily a negative. I would love something that described to me what this was, what the benefits of it were. I would understand specifically what materials, if I choose to augment the front of the house, what are my limitations? What am I allowed to do? I need to be educated on that, because when people, again, it's always about information and communication. When something's unknown, it creates anxiety and things kind of spiral.
Yeah.
So,
And
people want to understand the value of what they're buying and how is that,
correct.
how is that additive?
And to
The value of the
Jennifer's
house.
I
point,
think that we can definitely do a pamphlet that explains that. And I think as a realtor and other realtors in the town can explain, because it happens in municipality after municipality across the nation, is that when you have certainty that I'm going to invest, a ton of money in my house and make it look amazing and restore the front and put on an addition, I want to know my neighbors are going to do the same and not mess up my streetscape. I know that sounds terrible, but it gives a sense of comfort that that okay, I bought a house on a historic street and all these buildings are historic and they look so great right now, and I feel the character and it feels really good and it's going to be maintained.
and Rich, the other side of that is too, yes, this is another level of responsibility because it's an historic house. But to your point, we spend a lot of time going through the design regulation ordinances, right? They're attached now. We try to make that design regulation ordinance easier for the contractors, easier for the city, the people that had to, the zoning officer and all of those people in community services that had to approve the regular application. So I agree with you completely. It should not be a mystery that those requirements are the same requirements or specifications that are attached to the DRO. Yes, they're another level of responsibility, but any buyer coming into the city of Summit can't just take their house down and build whatever they want, whether it's a non-historic preservation, because we came up with design regulation ordinances. So I completely agree with you. The more information there is, the easier it is for somebody to understand what they can and can't buy or build. It should be. And we're not trying to prevent anybody from doing that. It's, hey, you are buying an historic house. This is the next level of responsibility. If you don't want that responsibility, buy a house in Summit, but comply with the other regulations that we have in the DRO.
There's an excellent brochure, very similar to what you're asking for, that exists. I can't remember what municipality, but it's not far from here. It's so well done. So I'll dig that up and share it with everybody if you want.
Matthew, looks like you.
Yes,
Old
just
hand
one
up or
last
new
question.
hand
No,
up?
that's a new hand, but that'll be the last one, I promise.
That's all right.
Barton, just real quick, how do historic preservation commissions who have a certificate of appropriateness have to modify their attendance or meeting frequency to address what might be a volume issue for approval? I would imagine switching from a week or a commission that is report writing and commenting versus one that actually has to deliver on an approval. How does the timing work for commitment that way, or volume of meetings, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of planning and zoning boards around the state too. And, usually the commissions end up having 2 or 3 applications a month. Like I said, a lot of things you end up doing like no CA or exemption type letters. So it's like reviewing something, but it's like, well, this isn't even visible from the street, or this is really just maintenance, so you don't have to come to us. So there's those type of inquiries as well. And then, just like planning or zoning, sometimes you get applicants who, it takes them 2 or 3 months to get the right design, or have to come back for revisions or go back to the drawing board or whatever. And then, so it ends up being a few applications a month. I don't think it's anything too out of the ordinary for what other land use boards do. And they all seem to handle the volume pretty well. In fact, usually it's easier to go to historic first, because usually you can get on the agenda much quicker. And then if you have to eventually go for a variance or go for planning board approval, if there's a use change, then that usually works out better anyway. So they get their historic approval and then they can move on to the next board.
Jay, it looked like you had a question there.
Just one more. How would the ordinance deal with demolition? We haven't addressed that at all. If I want to tear down a house, what happens?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
You want to go into how the MLUL doesn't allow us to ban demolition. So it's never going to be not allowed. But
Okay.
There's basically a process that's set up that encourages perhaps reuse or this sort. It delays, but it can't ban.
But will we see that as part of this review? Because I think that's important if we're going to.
It's in the ordinance. It's delineated
It's in
in the
your-
ordinance.
okay.
It's
Yeah,
the toughest part is
unfortunately.
to block where-
Wait, I couldn't hear you. Go ahead, Jennifer, please.
We tried to make it shorter, easier, but it's just the MLUL has a lot to say about how we write these
Sure.
things.
Right.
And that's why it's
Yes.
so darn long. And that's why
Okay.
that section in particular is so darn long. So
Well, that
as
long
much as
doesn't bother me.
as much as we wanted to condense it and simplify, we know that I'm just gonna tell the ordinance that we started with is the most legally defensible in New Jersey, and Barton wrote it, and that's where we started. And so we ended up not changing it or simplifying it any more than we needed to, because we wanted to still have that legal strength.
Okay.
Because
And
you don't
I
want to
ask
get
that is,
sued You wanna have a tried and true document that works.
Good.
So
Good.
that's why we started with that document. And luckily he wrote it for Summit, and it's the same as the one in a neighboring town that's been challenged. So we'd love to have made it 10 pages and really simple, but we couldn't. And the demo section's particularly cumbersome because of the MLUL, and you can't just prohibit demolition. It's just
Right.
a delay.
But
Jay-
you know, Jennifer, we, over the course of the 10 years or so we've been at this, we've had a number of situations where I'm going to call them old houses, whether they were historic or not is subject to debate, that, you know, sometimes there are differences of opinion as to their value.
Yes,
So
Jay, there's.
would any of that come out differently, I guess, is what I'm thinking about now. If we had this in place, would the outcome have been different? And it sounds like the answer is no.
It depends on the owner and what they decide to do.
Well,
But
Can I ask you a question to that point, though? So
wait a
in a
second.
demolition situation, do you
Wait a
have to
second.
create something that
Wait a
hits certain
second.
guidelines for that district?
Jay just said, you know, as if it's after the fact that whether you decide whether it's historic or not. We're going to establish what's historic before.
right.
So you know what's in a district and you know what's individually eligible. It's going to be very rare at a local level to you know, as you're reviewing something, you determine if it's eligible or not, or if it's locally designatable. That's something happens in other, you know, 106 review and other things, but I doubt it would happen in this situation. We're going to say, here are our districts and here are our 36 remaining individually listed buildings. And that's going to be it, I think, for a very long time. So it won't be debatable, is this historic or not? It'll be, every district will say what's contributing in this district, and it's based on our original surveys that we already have.
Can I make
I don't want to belabor this, but my point about it wasn't our designation of historic, but the buyers. How would this have impacted, in my opinion, what I think have been successful redevelopments of certain older properties? Would that still have occurred if we had this ordinance in place? That's just a way of thinking about or evaluating an ordinance like this. What would it have meant for those two houses on, you know, right at the railroad tracks at Morris Avenue, for example? What would have happened if 51 to Forest be any different? I don't think so, but that's how I'm thinking about the implementation. How would this impact?
Are you talking about the
purchasers,
building on
developers,
Campus
and others?
That was a Queen Anne that was bifurcated into two.
Yeah.
That wasn't in a district, I don't think.
Okay.
But I don't remember. I don't remember now.
I don't remember.
But if it was in a
You
district,
can add
then
oratory
it
prep
was
to that if you
really-
want as a question.
Yeah, oratory prep would be a very good example. Thank you.
That was historic.
Can I make a suggestion? Because none of you have had a chance to read the draft. And so everybody's asking questions about things that are not in it. And it's probably better, everybody gets it, everybody reads it, and then the next meeting or whatever, Bill, you want to schedule, but we're trying to answer stuff and talk about stuff that is, we're getting way too specific for what this meeting was supposed to be. And it's great. And obviously everybody's got a lot of questions. But until you read it, because there's a whole mechanism on the potential sale of the property. Did you try to sell the property before you demolished it? What's a fair and reasonable value of the property before you? It isn't just, you want to demo the property, I tried to sell it for $1. There's a whole, you know, to Matt's question, there's a number of days that when the application is submitted that the historic preservation has to come back. There's a number of days, I think, that there, you know, that the city has to notify people. So I think, you know, again, Bill, you decide, but I think everybody should just.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Read it, and then we can all talk about it.
Paul had one question. I don't want to cut Paul off because he had a question.
No, I rudely kind of jumped in while Jay and Jennifer were going back and forth. But my question, and again, this is about, this goes back to Andy's point about we probably all need to read this thing. But my question was just, in a demolition situation, is there anything above and beyond the just typical zoning guidelines that goes to the historic district's standards of some capacity that have to be implemented to some new construction? You know, does the house have to be somewhat similar in look or feel to what was there before? Or does it have to adhere to certain design
But you're
guidelines?
saying infill development.
Right.
When
New
building
construction, something that's
in
been
the third
demolished for
district.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
Does whatever replaces it on that lot have to be somehow
Compatible
in
to the
matching with that
neighborhood
district?
streetscape. Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
I mean, it's a much lower bar. It's just, so that it's compatible with the streetscape.
But I think what it lets you do, and again,
You'll see
everybody
it in
should
there.
read it. If you have a house that's falling apart and you can't walk on the floors and you gotta demolish it, well, then you gotta demolish it, but you can't go build the Taj Mahal back where it was.
Right.
And I don't think historic preservation should let you go build the Taj Mahal where you had an 1835 colonial. And then you shouldn't have historic preservation. That we don't need to talk about this anymore. So yes, you can take it down if you're going to fall. This isn't what was the show where they were falling through? They bought the house.
Money Pit.
Money Pit.
The Money Pit with Tom Hanks.
It's not. We're not going to force you to live in the Money Pit. We don't want people falling through the floorboards and the siding flying off in the next Sandy and all that. But at the same time, like I said, you can't go put the Taj Mahal in its place. You got to put something like it, but you can put new material and not have the $5,000 heating bill.
I would guess, Andy, that most people on this call think that they live in the money pit, but that's another story altogether.
The nature of the house is a money pit. I'm in commercial real estate.
Hey, if you're a homeowner, you
I'm
live
going
in
to buy a
there.
house and make money. I'm like, no, you're not.
I just put a new roof on my house. So anyway,
Sure.
all right.
New roof,
Well, look,
new this.
And Barton, as you can see, we have a very reserved, quiet, and unopinionated group on this board, which is what makes it so much fun to do this all the time. And so we're looking forward to your input. I'm looking forward to reading this thing from cover to cover and taking your presentation and kind of supplementing. I think it'll be really helpful. So thank you very much, Barton, for taking the time to be with us tonight and giving us a presentation. And we look forward to working with you. And hopefully what you've heard tonight won't scare you away.
I've heard it all before. So yeah, I appreciate all of your time. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we
Can
have
I sorry,
yes.
Bill, can I just say, is there anything that Barton wants to say before he goes, just in
okay,
case
yeah,
he didn't
sure.
answer them sufficiently, the question?
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone's already said it. The devil's in the details. So yeah, everyone should read through the ordinance and, kind of come back with more questions. But, just to kind of put everyone's mind at ease, I mean, in all historic districts, we allow demolitions and things, especially when it's, not a contributing building to the district. And if it's some ranch house that was in a district and nobody appreciated, and it has mildew and mold and whatever, yeah, they approve it to be demolished. It's not a big deal. And as long as you stay within design guidelines and you match the streetscape and the view sheds for that historic district and neighborhood, then everyone's happy. Then the neighbors don't come out and complain, just like it was any other land use board. So yeah, I think when it works well, it works well. So
Thanks again, Barton.
thank you.
We have our next meeting is the 28th of March. And if there's no other questions, comments, or others, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would just like to say, John, I'm going to rename you Dr. Evil.
I am sorry. The cat is very anxious to read this report. He wants to read the report.
We have to see it like full face
I
on.
think you should be petting it in the next meeting.
Ellen, where's your cat?
I think
Comes for
John
me,
and
what did I
Ellen
tell
should
you?
be in the same room and their cats should hang out together.
Yeah, Ellen, we want to see the cat.
Oh, she's eating, I think.
They're all
She's
right.
eating
Rich,
She's eating some beef bourguignon. Oh, you have our kitty too.
That's a good looking cat. Man.
Rich, we're gonna make John shave his head though. He's gonna do the Dr. Evil.
Yeah, I'm doing Dr. Evil from now on.
Your cat is too fuzzy for Dr. Evil because he had the.
I'll take off the blur next time.
Oh. No, she's so pretty. Aw.
I'm only joking.
All right, guys, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Good night,
See you-
Barton.
see you
Thanks,
Monday.
buddy.
Thank you, Barton.
Thanks.